Women in Leadership Services in the Service Sector, please welcome Maria Morris, Executive Vice President, Global Employee Benefits Business and Global Brand and Marketing at MetLife. She is joined by our distinguished panel of guests whose biographies you'll find in the program. They include Mary Snapp, Corporate Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at Microsoft, Karen Mazer, Principal, Deloitte Consulting, Stacy Schwartz, Vice President of Public Safety, AT&T Government Solutions, and the rapporteur for this panel is Chantal Isaac, International Policy Analyst, ACLI. I'll turn it over to you, Maria.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Peter Allgaier and the CSI team for inviting us to have the privilege of putting this panel together. And based on what we heard this morning, it's obviously a critical time in the services trade agenda. So the idea of an ambitious and 21st century agenda has been talked about all day, but we'd like to try to give you a different point of view from senior business leaders across 4 services industries. And it's interesting, as we were preparing, we were talking about the fact that the global value chain is alive and well here. I work for MetLife, and as you may know, we're a leading life insurance company in over 50 countries, and we actually serve 100 million clients. We actually have life, protection, and employee benefits products around the globe, and as such, all 3 of the other companies that are represented here are part of our global value chain. One of the things that I wanted to talk through today is what the strategies of our companies are and why it's so critical that the trade agenda includes services. So you'll hear a lot more from business strategists. We're not the trade experts, but we're very much the business strategists, and we can give you a point of view about why this all matters. So let me get right into it. So our first question today is, what does it take for a company like yours, Stacy, at AT&T, to be successful in the next 5 to 10 years? And why is the trade agenda so critical to us?
Okay. So perhaps I can start with where we see opportunity for a company like AT&T. We provide global data and communication services around the world. We do it with a lot of work with partners like we have here on this panel, supporting a lot of multinational enterprises, which then in turn enable a lot of goings-on in local markets. So where we're seeing a lot of opportunity, and I think everyone's a part of this, it's not unique to AT&T, is really the mobilization and virtualization of everything we do. And we support large multinationals in so doing that. So the more that technologies enable transactions, applications in a mobile manner, and the fact that we can do them anywhere, we need the flexibility to be able to do that where it makes sense, right? So virtualization of where you house your data, how you store your data, et cetera. Same thing with mobilization. We were just actually speaking about how everything is on a device. I think that's been brought up in a variety of contexts here from a trade perspective. So the continued proliferation of all the mobilization and virtualization then in turn we require to provide infrastructure all around the world to support all of those trends. And what would enable that is the flexibility around the world to do that seamlessly with our clients. Examples of that might be the fact that today we enable transactions and business activity without even human interaction, machine-to-machine type activities. We do that in a transportation environment. We help transportation industries monitor what is going on from a traffic and transportation model, both from a mobile and a virtual perspective. Those are just examples. I think in terms of where, from an opportunity perspective, what that does for us is it creates a complexity in the environment that we all need to manage. So from a strategy perspective, continued innovation, continued integration, and how we solve problems using all of that technology.
Great. Karen, you want to join in?
Sure. And as a professional services firm, we fundamentally provide 3 collections of services. We provide audit services, tax, and consulting. And underlying all of that is the way we do that, and it's all through people, right? So around the world, we do almost all of our work through people. And our clients, similar to what Stacy said, our clients expect consistent global delivery when they hire us to solve one of their business problems. So some of the complexities around that are, from an internal perspective, it's to be able to have consistent global capabilities no matter where you are in the world, so that we know that when you hire us to do a big systems implementation, that we're able to provide the same quality and capabilities in every country that we do business in and every country that our clients do business in. The flip side of that from the regulatory perspective is our clients expect us to be able to do what they hire us to do, and from a regulatory standpoint, there are different combinations of capabilities that are permitted in different environments. So as you know, in the US, there's a significant prohibition around providing consulting services if we audit a client. Now with the new regulation in Europe, there are prohibitions against serving a client with tax services if we audit them, along with the complexity of a regulatory world. In most countries, you can combine tax and legal capabilities. You can't do that in the US. And so, but our clients nonetheless expect us to be able to keep those capabilities and deliver those capabilities when they hire us, no matter where they operate.
And from my perspective, I think everyone knows Microsoft, and our vision is to help people do more and be more all around the world. And we think about ourselves as a leader in providing productivity solutions, whether you are a consumer managing a home calendar or whether you're a CIO or IT professional at one of the largest corporations in the world. So when we think about the work that we do, we think about ourselves as, we say, a cloud-first, mobile-first company. And what that means is that we do assume that people will be using devices, all kinds of devices, from the size of a very small phone to a very large mainframe, and that they will be able to get the same information no matter what device they use and no matter where they are in the world, because the information that they need, whether it's a spreadsheet that has to do with your kids' football league, or whether it is the integration of a $16 billion business that Maria was involved in, because the information is stored in the cloud. So what does that mean in terms of thinking about how we deliver that kind of a productivity platform for families, for consumers, for enterprises, and for companies? It means that we need to be able to be in regimes where we can actually store information in various places around the world in order to enable the efficiency and the fast delivery of that information. We need to be able to move information from server to server in order to service it, in order, again, to provide the operations and the maintenance. We need to provide communication services in some places and then actual data storage and manipulation in other places. That means we need to be in a regime where intellectual property is protected. That means we need to be in regimes where there is infrastructure so that we can have high-speed internet access and broadband. That means we need to be in regimes where the licensing and the requirements to do business are known and well known, so that we're not surprised, as we were with Xbox One in China a week ahead of time, thinking about what it would take to actually launch there. And that means we need to understand what privacy and security regulations are from geo to geo and be able to harmonize those. All things that are very important in the trade negotiations, none of which are so easy to do, but all of which are incredibly important.
And if you look at it from MetLife's perspective, we need all of what was just discussed, obviously, as part of our value chain. But if you think of the insurance industry being in 50 markets, we're in a combination of developed and emerging markets. In some of the developed markets, you heard this morning from ACE that you have double-digit life insurance penetration as a percentage of GDP. But I would tell you there's a lot of underserved populations. For example, the middle market, who's underinsured for life insurance, or the aging population where retirement's a much bigger issue. So digital opportunities to get to clients is huge. So a lot of what was just discussed around the ability to use social media, the open data flows are critical even in a mature market like the US. You go to emerging markets, and there we have much different issues. There we have issues of market access, of the level playing field, of being in a position where we can make investments into the local countries that we do business in. This is a local business for us. And so it's very critical for us, as we actually have liabilities in the life insurance industry, that we have assets that match those. So we want to invest in long-term investments around infrastructure and other things in the emerging markets. But we've got to be in a position to do that in the right way. And from a global perspective, I actually run our global employee benefits business, and our corporate clients, as well as MetLife, what they're looking for is the ability to look at attracting and retaining talent, moving talent in a way that benefits serve as a lever to do that attraction and retention. And you may know from many studies that benefits are second just to salary in attracting and retaining both local and global employees. So it's critical for us to have the data flows that are able to get reporting put together to help employers understand what is competitively viable in the markets that they're doing business in. And once we do that globally, it helps us locally in the local markets. Because I can tell you in employee benefits, as multinational companies offer more benefits, local companies, as they look to compete with talent, also then develop more as well. So really, this is an ecosystem, and the need for services across the value chain, I think, is very evident here.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it's really important to think about is the value that advances in technology can provide to small and medium businesses, many of which, disproportionately, in fact, are started by women. Microsoft recently commissioned a study from Boston Consulting Services. Sorry. And what we learned in that study was that those small and medium businesses, which are really forward thinkers in terms of adoption of technology, really see contributions both in terms of the bottom line revenue, 15% on average greater revenue than those who are further behind in terms of using technology, and they generate jobs at almost a 2-to-1 ratio from those companies who are not so adept at using that technology. We also find that in many emerging markets, many of the people who are starting businesses are women, and that women are more likely to use the benefits of technology, particularly social media. And if you think about marketing and social media, the ways in which people are doing very innovative and interesting things in marketing, you have women entrepreneurs on the forefront of that. So the more that we can provide access to technology to small and medium businesses, the more we both advance the economy by growing jobs and by growing revenue to the bottom line.
So Mary talked a little bit about some trends that we're seeing here, SME growth as well as women-owned businesses and the enablement of technology. But what are some of the other trends that you're seeing in your businesses that we really need to get underneath, specifically related to the agenda here today?
I think I referenced a couple of them before, and I think it sort of speaks to the discussion of talent. We've really, at AT&T, sort of changed the way we look at our workforce as a result of some of the technology trends. Whereas before, we might have looked for people that had much more, and we still do, look for people that have a knowledge of the actual infrastructure. We're now looking at people that have more of a focus on the end application and software so that you can innovate and enable bringing all of the technologies together. We're living in a time where everything is, there's so much multimedia coming at you at once that if you don't know how to effectively integrate that, and if you can't work from a client or even a consumer's end reason for the technology, you really can't work quickly enough to innovate and help your customers. So back to the whole aspect of workforce and small medium business, that is a big effort of ours as well, to both enable small and medium-sized businesses around the globe, but also use them as our suppliers as we're creating larger infrastructure, applications, and systems around the world. So
yeah, and it sort of speaks again to what we all refer to as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And those of you who are following the data really do understand that we have really disproportionate numbers in terms of the number of new jobs created each year in the United States in STEM and the number of college graduates to fill those jobs, and it's about a 3-to-1 disproportion. When you take that and then you think about women in STEM, the numbers are even smaller. The number of women who are graduating with STEM degrees is really, really quite low. And when you see where the technology is going, it is really going the wrong way in terms of taking advantage of talent in the workforce, and tells you what we should be doing in terms of education and other kinds of initiatives.
Which actually starts to point towards another very significant trend. In addition to all these wonderful things happening technologically, it's just the whole notion of an open talent market. And you think about within 10 years, we expect that half our workforce will be contract workers. You add that together with what's happening from a millennial perspective. By 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials, and what matters to them is innovation and organizations that have a sense of social purpose, that capture their attention and keep them engaged. And you put those two things together, sort of a very different talent market with a very different technological landscape, and the way that work will get done, I know, will be completely different than it gets done today. And you start to see it now. You look at UberX, right, where you can have strangers come take you for rides instead of taxi cabs.
I did that last week.
Or maybe of a more significant nature, things like XPRIZE, which are using industrial crowdsourcing to solve really hard problems around the world with, voluntary workforces that get to decide whether or not they want to participate. And we look at all of that, and we know that that's going to have a very significant impact for us, both in terms of how we attract and retain talent, how we leverage contract workers, and think about them as an integrated part of our workforce, how work actually gets done to serve our clients, what the expectations are for our clients around how we interact with them in a virtual environment. Very significant changes.
Talent is, there's a number of issues around this. MetLife actually had worked with the Economist Intelligence Unit, to do some research recently. We wanted to find out where multinational corporations were moving, how they were going to grow. And we found out that multinational corporations are growing quite well in many markets, developed and emerging markets. But we then asked, what was the obstacle to success? And the largest obstacle to success was attracting the right talent. As a matter of fact, 60% of people said talent was their biggest issue, and that was above socio-political and economic issues in these key markets. So talent is a real issue. It's an issue locally, and it's an issue for global mobility, and it's an issue for the contract worker issue that you just mentioned as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to do is to think about how we as companies can invest in emerging markets. We, earlier in the week, announced an initiative in India, and we announced with the government that we wanted to provide additional IT skills to 1 million women in India in 2015. And that work would be divided between skills and mentoring at high school levels, at the higher education levels where the bulk of the work will be done, and then for women already in the IT sector. And it is a critical need in terms of fueling the IT economy in India, of which we are a major source of drawing work and contributions from that economy in the IT sector, and again, important for growing talent around the world.
You're mentioning just the education, so if you combine the fact that everything's mobile and virtual, one of the things we've done is we've created online education, so folks want to get more well-versed and sort of groom themselves to sort of move with technology and move with the workforce. We are delivering both nano degrees, full degrees into the workplace. So actually, while you're employed, if you decide you want to pursue something in the technology arena, not just sort of our own commercial resources, et cetera, we partner with Georgia Tech and some other U.S. institutions as well as global institutions to provide education online. So to your point, no matter where you are, we can continue to grow our workforce as well. So.
Which has enormous benefit to the women in the working world, right? To just give them the kind of flexibility that they may need to raise a family while working and contributing, maybe on a part-time basis, maybe not, but certainly with a lot more flexibility than they have today.
I just want to go back to some comments that were made earlier with regard to data, cross-border data issues, and housing of the data as well. And one of the things that we find as we move into a lot of the emerging markets is that the needs are great and the infrastructure is not always there. And so the clients, our consumers and our employers, want more of an ability to do digitized services. They want the ability to be able to get to their data and get the analytics associated with how their plans are running. And as such, we've really found that we are better off in some cases to have a hub and spoke model on where our data sits. It enables us to invest in very robust data centers with all levels of protection. It puts us in a position where we can efficiently get the data into the country and be leveraged privately in the country, but it enables us to bring capability into a lot of these markets that it just wouldn't exist otherwise. And I'd also say, with regard to the technology components, the social media component of our business, I double hat at MetLife, so I have global brand and marketing reporting to me as well. And increasingly, as we know, demographically, people are looking to research what they want to buy via social media. Whether they buy online or not, they're doing a lot more of their research there. So I guess I just throw that out as certainly something that we see in our business, and if anybody has anything to add.
It's a critical part of how we're growing Microsoft's business as we think about both our Office 365 product and our Azure product, where we host data of companies like all of you in the room, and governments and other academic institutions as well. Just as a matter of scale, Microsoft at this moment has 1 million servers up and running in 100 different discrete locations and in 40 countries around the world. So when you think about that, we make lots of different decisions in terms of where we locate a data center. We have a number of data centers in the United States, but we also have, as you just heard, many around the world. When we decide where to put a data center, there are something like 35 different factors that we consider. Some of them are very environmental. They relate to how much water and cooling capability is nearby. They relate to things like just literally the physical amount of space that's nearby. And some of them are very much regulatory, going from tax sorts of issues to issues related to the freedom of expression, for example. We make very different decisions about what data gets stored in different places. So for example, while we would have a data center that really supports Office 365 in China, we think of that really as a customer-oriented data center and an enterprise data center. All communication services are located outside of that country. And those decisions are made relative to thinking about public policy in the area. Those kinds of issues actually run counter to how you would organize a data center infrastructure if you were doing it purely for scale and efficiency. If you were doing it purely for scale and efficiency, you pick core places where you can amass amounts of data that you can help customers manipulate and analyze and review, and then you locate what we would call edge servers in other spots around the world so that you can route the data in order to ensure that it gets places very quickly around the world. And, but that, again, does not necessarily track with the kinds of policy questions that we're talking about. So when we think about what we are doing, we are very focused on encryption and all kinds of encryption technology, whether it is encryption of data at rest or whether it is encryption of data that is in transit between data centers or in transit from a customer to us. We also think a lot about the contractual commitments that we apply, and we tell customers where their data resides. We very much focus on being sort of the leading edge of things like the EU data protective and model clauses, which in addition to the sort of authentication and encryption work, has very, very specific guidelines and rules about the physical monitoring of data and the personnel who have access to the data. So we are very focused on thinking about where data is located to best serve our customers, with the overview then of what the regulatory scheme is in the country, and it is a matrix. There is no question about it.
Yeah, and truthfully, I mean, it helps us to have this type of approach, certainly for MetLife, because when you think about what we're looking to deliver in any given marketplace, it's not unusual for us to be piloting a technological solution in one country with a product innovation from another country, and then finding the best place to deliver is in a third country. And really, that's innovation. You want to be in a position where you actually can take the best of the technology that you're putting together and start to proliferate it into more the countries around the world. It's been very important for us in the emerging markets, where, frankly, we can move to digitized strategies much more quickly. So we can pilot in many of the emerging markets where they've gone digital immediately, and then bring those back into other developed markets, which is why the free flow and why the trade agenda is so critical to us as well. So I'd like to just ask a couple more questions since we are the women's panel. We started to get a little bit into trends in terms of kind of growth for our industry, but I'd like to make this a little bit more personal as senior women business leaders. And if you could talk a little bit about why kind of the focus on diversity and inclusion matter, and why having more women in the workplace actually helps us in the trade agenda as well.
You want to
Shall I
start?
go first? I'll
Yeah.
take that one first. So for us, it really falls down into three buckets. One is from a talent perspective, right, to have access to a talent market that, coming out of college, is about 50% female. We want to be a place that gets the best, and we need to make sure that we can attract those that are the best of the best. The second is from a client perspective. So our clients look diverse. It doesn't work if you don't show up looking like your clients. And so we want to make sure that we have that. And then the third is research will show that diverse teams get to better outcomes, right? Bringing broad perspectives, whether it be gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity of thought, it gets to better outcomes. And so 22 years ago, when I was just starting with Deloitte, we launched our Women's Initiative because we noticed that our incoming hires were 50% women, and when we looked at our partner admission rates, it was nowhere close to that. And so we set out on a journey to try and figure out what happened, right? What was it? And over that period of time, we've made a lot of progress, right? We've closed the gender gap. We've had the first female chairman of the board of a Big Four firm. Our first, actually 3 weeks ago, we became a first to have a CEO of an audit business in the Big Four. We have 1,600 female partners and directors. We have a number of wonderful programs, but we're still not there yet, right? We still need to keep working on it, and especially in regards to the pipeline.
So I can go next. So I think diversity, unfortunately or fortunately, it has to be a conscientious effort in an organization. At AT&T, we actually have a chief diversity officer who really makes an effort, not just with women, but across the board, just to make sure that there is diverse representation across the board, right? We have employee resource groups that represent any population within our company that we believe needs a voice. So a lot of efforts to actually promote diversity across the board. From a women's perspective, we're pretty proud. I think this is the first time top AT&T woman made the list on Fortune, top 50 women in business, leading a very, very large portfolio of our business. While one woman does not, speak to an entire corporation, it is indicative, I think, of a lot of the effort that we've made. At a more sort of, where are we going for the future? I can maybe give you a sort of myself as a microcosm. I invest a lot of my time doing things in the community that matter. To both represent the company but also represent interests. And given where we are, we mentioned the words, the sort of terminology STEM, which is known to a lot of folks. I spend a lot of time on a STEM council where bringing in young women is a very big part of that because of the underrepresentation. I've actually mentored girls in technology, which, there is a stigma there. There's definitely a stigma there, a lack of confidence, a lack of representation. I actually mentored a young woman who in her high school class, very small, relatively small high school class, there were only 3 young women that were actually looking to pursue an engineering degree. And they had nowhere to turn. There was not a lot of mentoring or coaching going on within the guidance counselor environment, et cetera. So I think from a corporate involvement perspective, the more we can do to bring what we do in our corporate environments and embrace the community and sort of embrace young talent when they're considering what they want to do, I think the more we can populate diversity from the beginning, as opposed to making it a kind of a corporate charter, if you will.
Yeah, and at Microsoft we like to think about diversity and inclusion, and we use the word inclusion as well. And if you think about the issues associated with a broad talent force, and you think about women around the world, we really focus with our STEM programs, and particularly a program that was started a year ago called Youth Spark, in providing training and opportunities for youth literally around the world, working through a network of partnerships with various nonprofits. And the goal is to provide 300 million youth within the next year. The program's been ongoing for 2 years with some access to technology, skills, and training that don't exist today. Clearly, these issues outside of the United States, as much as they're focused on men, even more, they're focused on women, because women in economies outside of the United States have not been typically as advanced even as they have been in the United States, where we still see disparities in terms of numbers of women in the workforce, and then data with women who are fully engaged in the workforce in knowledge economies. So the work that we're doing with Youth Spark and STEM and diversity and inclusion, quite frankly, immigration reform as well, is really important for us as we think about going forward. We have thought about diversity and inclusion for a long time. Computer science is, as we all know, not an area where women have traditionally worked. I think what we see is that even though when we're able to hire great young women, when you reach that point when you're really trying to balance a career and personal decisions, that critical stage where women engineers could be like highly, highly productive, we're finding women more sort of stepping back and taking different kinds of roles. So figuring out inclusion in the workforce is really important, not just for women, but also for other ethnic groups as well, who don't necessarily thrive in our machine-oriented, big engine kind of culture. We were thrilled to hire a couple of weeks ago an executive named Peggy Johnson from Qualcomm, who had spent 25 years at Qualcomm as an engineer to work at our senior leadership team. And we have had for a long time Lisa Brummel with our organization heading our HR group, who comes from the engineering and marketing ranks as well. Everybody can always do more. My personal commitment is also quite strong. When I started at Microsoft, a long time ago, 25 years ago, I was the first woman attorney in the legal department.
You started when you were 2, right?
Exactly, exactly. We now have 150 women in the legal department of a group of about 450, so I've seen the growth. Still, we're at about 35% women lawyers. We're at about 25% female representation in the company as a whole, and that is because of the stronger focus towards, engineering and math kinds of skills. I have chaired the board of the Minority Corporate Counsel Association to really focus on advancing diversity in the legal profession, and have been the executive sponsor of our diversity group in the legal department for the last 10 or 12 years, and also do the kind of mentoring that others talk about. It is incredibly rewarding to do the one-on-one work, but it's also really, really energizing to do the work on an external basis as well. There is always more work to be done. There is no question about it.
Yeah, and I would just add, just from a diversity and inclusion perspective, Peter had asked us to take this question on. You might say, why does it matter to trade? It actually does. There is really 3 reasons why certainly MetLife looks at diversity and inclusion. One is very commercial, and I think it was said earlier, our clients, we need to represent our clients. And in the business that I'm in insurance, women either make the financial decision, or they're such an influencer that they in de facto are making the financial decisions in their family across many, many cultures. So while we think of that as a developed culture issue, it actually, in the emerging economies, we see that exact thing, that women are definitely influencing the decision making. So having more diversity of all types, as well as diversity with women in leadership positions, enable us to really get underneath the needs of the clients. And that's a critical component of what we're doing from a commercial perspective. From a community perspective, it gets a little bit to some of the things that we talked about earlier on, the SMEs and the proliferation of small, medium enterprises. I think if you look at the statistics of women-owned SMEs across the globe, including in the emerging markets, you're seeing them starting to become a much bigger percentage of those SME ownerships. And that's important. You look at the developed market like the US, where they're already representing about 25% of the new jobs. You're thinking about what that can be in other marketplaces. It's really critical that we move forward. And then if you look at certain countries, you think about what Abe's doing with Womenomics in Japan as an example, where 50% of the workforce is not really being as productive as they could be. And with their aging population, it's so critical that they really tap into the full force of their workforce. And so you have governments like Japan where they're asking private sector and obviously making commitments at the public and government level to change the representation at the top. So I think one of the things that's important about this discussion, if you think about trade and kind of the openness of global mobility, of the openness of really and transparency around how we deliver, having diverse workforces, frankly, in both private and public sector is going to enable us to kind of open up our minds to what's possible. And what we find is diverse teams do actually innovate more. Diverse teams, you find a recent Deloitte study actually has shown that when people feel like they work in diverse teams, they feel more included, they feel more empowered to be in a position to innovate. And so at the end of the day, I think that's what we're looking to do, is have all of our organizations and all of our countries be in a position where we can continue to grow together. And so it's an important part of the discussion we're having here.
I'm sure that AT&T has some of the same kinds of thoughts that we do about this topic too. So I've talked a little bit about data centers, which seem very amorphous and not very something not to get very emotional about. But if you think about just the plethora of services that are available on your electronic device and the kinds of things that you now use your phone or your handheld computer for that you never did a year or so ago, the productivity gains, whether it's what the weather is like, what is the breaking news in a particular area, what restaurant you need to go to plan your business event, all of these things are very, very important in terms of thinking about reaching an audience where women feel as comfortable using the devices and want to use the device and the service as men. So we're not just talking about Forza 5, Xbox One here. We are really talking about the kinds of services that on an everyday basis will be important for you to manage your life in a productive way.
I will tell you, I did go shoe shopping on my flight home last night.
On the flight
on
home?
On
okay,
my
good.
mobile device.
Well,
so.
I may be one of the few people who, when I go out to the March Madness basketball, I always get shoe ads on the March Madness Fox News thing.
So just to kind of wrap this up a little bit in terms of the importance of the trade agenda that we've talked about today, and kind of what keeps you up at night as we think about kind of forwarding services in trade. Anybody want to take that?
I think I'll start. I think from the company's perspective, it's some of the things we've talked about, which is talent, being able to hire talent in a particular country, being able to move talent from country to country. As we want to move people around to give them broader work experiences. If I were to ask Satya Nadella about this, I think he'd talk about talent. If you asked me as a lawyer, I would talk about ensuring that we have fair and transparent practices so that we can do business around the world in all the places that we need to do business, and not just selling in hard goods, but really it's the question of what I call the sovereignty of data in the broad sense of the word, and how we manage which countries have laws which apply to the storage, the use, the collection, the privacy, and the security of, again, a broad range, a broad definition of data.
For me, I would just look at a macro level. The basis of competition is changing for us. Some of it is driven by the regulatory environment, but more of it is being driven by innovation that's happening, technological innovation, changing talent, and just big brains thinking about how to solve problems. I know for sure that the way we do work today will look different in 10 years. I just don't know how, and I don't know if someone's going to disrupt us before we figure it out. And so that would be what really keeps me up at night, is how do I be the disruptor before I'm the one who's disrupted?
So I'll combine a little bit of the corporate and the personal. What keeps me up at night, I have a lot of STEM going on in my home every evening. Really when I think about it, how our future generations are growing and how they're innovating and how they're collaborating, all of that depends upon being able to do that on a global basis. There's no longer all of these innovations, you brought up innovation, that just happens within a certain environment. There are dependencies, and to bring the talent and the innovation and the next big thing, it's not necessarily going to happen in Silicon Valley or in Tel Aviv or somewhere else. It's going to happen around the world. And so from both a personal and professional perspective, we need an environment where all of that collaboration, all of the data, all of the personnel can work transparently for innovation to occur and for the workforce to prosper and be diverse, much like we talked about today. So.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, again, working for an insurance company, you heard this morning that life insurance penetration is very low, really across the globe. In the emerging markets, it's extremely low. And as people, the rising middle class, as they have assets to protect, it's critical for us to be in those markets and be able to deliver for people when they need it and to help them protect their assets for the long term. Because really, at the end of the day, we believe that insurance and protection is critical for them to be able to live their life in the way that they want to. So in that environment, in these local markets, in the emerging markets, the ability to have kind of open market conditions, to be in a position where there's a level playing field, to be in a position, as we talked about earlier, where we have kind of transparent rules around how we make investments, the long-term investments we'd like to make in these emerging markets to help with infrastructure and other things, but then also very important investments we're making to actually back the liabilities of all of these insurance contracts we're putting together locally. I'd also say, go back to talent. In the insurance industry, we're not selling widgets, we're selling promises and people. And so talent is a huge part of our strategy as well. And it's very much about our local talent and our local markets, as well as the ability to have global mobility and move people around. And then the transparency with which we can move innovation. At the end of the day, we need to make everything we make for our consumers and for our corporate clients efficiently and effectively. And our ability to actually leverage innovation and move from country to country with that innovation is a big part of our growth strategy. And what keeps me up at night is that we move fast enough with the services agenda, frankly, to be in a position to develop what we need to develop in an efficient and effective way for consumers and our employers. So with that, what I'd like to do, we've kind of done a number of different things from a business perspective, but I would like to open it up for questions at this point. I know we're the first panel after lunch, so if anybody's having their afternoon nap, we can open it.
I think here's the gentleman.
I think a mic's coming.
Hi. Hello? Hello. Hi. Thank you for a very engaging discussion. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm with the Ameson Foundation. And I also want to let you know that I also, on the personal side, I also have a lot of stake in the STEM field. I have 2 daughters, both who graduated in engineering fields. They're all working, fortunately, paying off those college loans. But if you don't mind, I'm going to do a very quick plug for an event that we're holding next month at George Washington University in cooperation with their School of Education. And it's basically looking at a study of textbooks from 22 different countries in terms of their levels of difficulty and the knowledge content standards that inform them. And in relation to what's going on in the United States with the development of Common Core standards, which you may be aware of, because this is something like 44 states, I think, have signed on to Common Core, which is going to have a huge impact on education in the United States and the development of a workforce that we hope many of them will go into the service sector. And the other component of this, we have a gentleman who was involved with the development of Shanghai's education curriculum, and Shanghai students scored tops in the world on PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. So these are the main 2 topics, and we think that this is important to people in the education sector, to people in the service sector, people from all sectors really. But I'm just kind of wondering, what's your take on Common Core? It's not your field, I know, but it's going to have a huge impact on...
I would say it's not my field, and I'm not the expert at all on Common Core. But I think that one of the great benefits, setting aside how you associate what standards should be, one of the great benefits, hopefully, is allowing digitization of textbooks. Because if you think about the differences in quality of textbooks among countries in the world, quite frankly, there are differences in quality of textbooks within a particular metropolitan area between
Yes.
a public school and a very expensive private school. And that just makes no sense for thinking about broad education and what we need to do for higher education. So to the extent that we can manage a situation where we have textbooks and content that is digital, that also means broadband in the schools, by the way, and that also means electronic equipment in the schools, I think it really does begin to provide an even playing field for public education in a much, much needed way in the United States, let alone around the world. There are lots of issues with digitization of textbooks, not the first of which is managing publisher relationships and those kinds of things. But it just strikes me that this is an area where we could provide lots and lots of great advantage and opportunity for students who don't have it today.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, thank you very much for listening.